Now, our final speaker for today is Dr. Ernani Checcucci, who is an electrical engineer by education. He joined the Brazilian Customs Service in 1995 and is currently the Undersecretary for Customs and International Relations of the Federal Revenue Secretariat. Prior to that, he worked for 6 years for the WCO, where he was Deputy Director of Capacity Building, managing the Columbus Program and Picard Program. And today, Ernani is going to speak to us on a global capacity building agenda for border agencies. Please join me in welcoming Ernani.
Thank you very much, Professor Windelson, for the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. In fact, Mr. Hall, I am on the hot spot after brilliant presentations today and just preventing you from starting a very nice evening. So I should be quick and should be sweet. First of all, I want to register my gratitude to the Azerbaijani customs for its incomparable hospitality. Azerbaijan has built a sound reputation about hospitality, and before arriving to Baku, I already had high expectations about this visit. Now that I'm here, I must agree that its generosity and warm reception went far beyond my expectations. Professor Aliev, my compliments to you and to your staff for hosting this important conference. I also present my compliments to all previous speakers that enlightened us today, during the day. And I would like to say that I'm really pleased and honored to take part of this panel session and for having the opportunity to share some of my perspectives on the Customs and the Border Agency's development agenda after the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. In addition to the role as Undersecretary for Customs and International Relations in Brazil, I am also honored to chair the WCO Capacity Building Committee. As mentioned by David, I also had the opportunity in my career to serve 6 years in the WCO in the capacity building agenda. Capacity building is an activity that demands a lot of energy, passion, and commitment. And it's something that I really carry close to my heart. In fact, in the day-to-day business in Brazil, what I try to do the most is to implement some of the lessons learned over the time in the international capacity building agenda. Customs administrations and border agencies normally operate under high pressure. If we take a picture of customs organizations around the world, we will find a great variety of administrative arrangements. I'm a curious person about customs administrations, so I took the job to count them. And in my last counting, I listed 149 administrations reporting to ministers of finance, and among them, 55 merged with revenue administration, as it is the case in Brazil. I also counted 12 administrations that are specific ministries, Ministry of Customs, or are independent agencies reporting to state committees or to the parliament. And at least 5 customs administrations report to ministers of justice, interior, or homeland security. It's not only the report lines that vary from country to country, but also the level of administrative autonomy, the investment capacity, and the importance the governments give to the border controls. Nevertheless, despite all these differences, all customs administrations perform a common function, and this is the control of international flow of goods, merchandise, vehicles, and means of transport, assuring compliance with domestic and international legislation. I always emphasize that our controls go beyond the international trade. It encompasses any good or vehicle that physically cross our borders and fall under our jurisdiction of our domestic laws. That's the reason why you have to pay so much attention to goods carried by passengers, to goods shipped over the postal service, or entering the country through transit regimes or any other customs regimes. The challenge for customs administrations is that our function, this very function of controlling the international flow of goods and vehicles, serves for many different governmental agendas. I normally classify these agendas in 4 main dimensions that you have here in the screens. The economic agenda that encompasses revenue collection, market protection against illegal commercial practices to secure the playing level of competition between traders and domestic producers. Trade facilitation, that is an economic agenda per se, even without the WTO trade facilitation agreements. It's absolutely important to promote an economic environment that supports investments and development. We also have the security agenda that includes the fight against international terrorism, organized crime, narco-trafficking, money laundering, the expectations related to protections of various different interests of societies that encompass protection of environment, health, fauna and flora, cultural heritage, that the Azerbaijan customs is very famous for its own work, fighting against the piracy, IPR illicit, etc. And also a 4th dimension, that is the international relations agenda, that demand us to comply with international multilateral, regional, or bilateral agreements as they normally become conditions to access markets. Not only trade agreements or economic integration agreements, but also agreements related to the security agenda, as the control of dual use of goods, weapons of mass destruction, chemical precursors, etc. I have to say that even one of the administrations, customs administrations, nowadays reports to a Minister of Foreign Affairs. There is one single case about this. So customs administrations normally deal with all these expectations on a daily basis. Depending on the strength and direction of the winds, we have to bend ourselves to meet the demands. Even though it's not rare to see some storms arriving and the organization being subject of a major transformation. We just saw this happening with the United States when security became a major priority for the country, led to the creation to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Similar transformations happening in Canada and the United Kingdom. If you are curious about the histories of customs administrations, I invite you to have a look in the case of Mongolia. After independence, Mongolia started as a department under the Minister of Finance, moved to Ministry of Trade and Industry, came back to Finance, moved again to Ministry of Defense and Social Security, returned to Ministry of Foreign Trade, and finally became an independent agency reporting to a state committee. So they have tried all the different models that we could think about. The point I'm trying to make is that there is a wrong tendency to think that a customs administration should serve mainly to one of these agendas, revenue, security, trade facilitation, whatever. And therefore, the capacity building initiatives tend to be segmented and narrow in its approach. A brief review of the international customs agenda in the last 10 to 15 years confirms that the security dimension gained a lot of importance. Basically, there is a consensus that international threats can disrupt legitimate trade and affect negatively the economic situation of any country. Under this agenda, the international customs community produced the WTO Safe Framework of Standards and many other initiatives to secure maritime and their cargo, along with investments on new technologies, such as the use of non-intrusive inspection equipment, bilateral arrangements to exchange data and intelligence, etc. We just saw how much far the Nigeria customs went along this path. The 2008 financial crisis, followed by economic crisis, has put a lot of pressure also, particularly in developing countries, to refocus on securing tax revenue. And finally, we got the long-awaited multilateral agreement on trade facilitation by the WTO members, with new commitments related to customs and border agencies. That is the main subject of this conference. I'm really happy to say that I had the opportunity to start in this agenda with some of my fellows here in the conference, Jan Hoffman, Lars Carlson, Alan Hall, exactly doing needs assessment on trade facilitation. All these drivers for reform and modernization are still present, and they will not disappear or become less important because new demands are arriving. So, what to do? How do we cope with this situation? We have, on the top of all the other priorities, the trade facilitation priority coming. In fact, I'm fully convinced that we cannot look the capacity building and modernization programs from the perspective of just one of the mentioned agendas. In my opinion, the international community that normally provides technical assistance and support should focus on what are the key factors or capacities that may enable any customs administration or any border agency to deliver all these expectations, including the WTO trade facilitation agreements. This is a topic that I believe academic research can make a very good and important contribution. I may not present here an exhaustive list of the requirements, but I will mention 5 key capacities that, in my opinion, are critical for implementation of the trade facilitation agreement or any other capacity building program. The first one is political will and leadership. Without political will, we cannot promote legislative changes, we cannot motivate people. It's impossible to impose changes from outside the organization. In other words, the organizations have to take ownership of their own development process and also to build its own future. The trade facilitation agreement helps in the sense that create an environment for political debate and also to help in the change in the legal framework. But political will has to happen in all levels of the organizations and the administration. I know some people that say it's all about people, how to motivate people, how to engage people. We also need a minimum supporting infrastructure, especially for people and integrity management. In this regard, being the chair of the WCO Capacity Building Committee, I'm pleased to say that the session of this year, the theme of the session was strong people, strong organizations. There are very important developments in this area approved by the committee that will now be submitted to the council session. I also acknowledge the efforts in some regions, as it was in the European region that approved the EU customs competency framework. But when we talk about people, it's not only about motivation, it's not only about people development, and they have the most professional person in the right place. It's about also having proper and sound integrity programs. Without integrity in place, you cannot sustain any development initiative over time. Very important is intelligence-driven risk management underpinned by a compliance strategy. It's not only a question to be able to identify the threats and do inspection. It's a question to really take action to mitigate the risks and attach it to a good compliance strategy that can conduce the traders and the clients in a much more compliance environment. So this is important not only for the import and export procedures, but basically to all customs procedures and to all border agencies procedures. Adoption of new technologies and the automation and information communication technology. We just saw an example about how this is important, but for many administrations, this is still a challenge, how to come up with structures and functions that are conducive to this type of initiative. Partnership and communication with private sector, other border agencies, and customs administrations. And here I segment in the 3 because they have different purpose. With the private sector, we must need to understand how trade happens, how do they operate. We have to understand what are the practices, procedures, in order to us to be able to design the best compliance strategy, in order to us to be able to better design what are the best control model, and also understand their requirements and provide proper solutions. Border agencies is more than fundamental, particularly in the trade facilitation agreement. I'm going to mention shortly that probably the great message from the WTO trade facilitation agreement is the need to expand from custom management into border management in a much broader scope of approach. And also, we have to think about the international customs administrations, how we are going to enhance our communication and partnerships in order to meet the challenges. Because the agreement took so long to be approved, my perception is that the final text in the agreement does not contain anything really new to the agenda of customs administrations. Many of the clauses and the requirements, they were already on the customs development plans, or they already developed, or already in expectation. This was already in the customs agenda for a long time. What happens now, in my perspective, is there is no more excuse. Now we really need to move, and we need to move fast. And customs has a role to play in this regard. We should take the leadership at the National Trade Facilitation Committee, and we have a lot to offer to the other border agencies. Probably we are the agency in the border that have more experience in applying risk management techniques, in understanding how can we do a better job without less intervention. So it's up to us to engage with the other border agencies and try to come up with good solutions in partnership, in real partnership with these border agencies. So as I mentioned, probably in my perspective, talking a little bit about Brazil, our major challenges will be the authorized economic operator and single window. All the other initiatives were already in our plans or are already implemented. I'm pleased to say that 4 weeks ago, we already announced a single window solution from 3 different ministers in the country with a presidential decree signed by the president to launch the project. And the authorized economic operator officially will be launched by the end of this year. We already have an experience on trusted trade programs. It's called Blue Line, but we are going to launch an AO program by the end of this year. So now, as mentioned by my colleague Jan Hoffman, the members are in that process of classifying their commitments and informing what will be the real needs for capacity building. So just after this phase, we are going to have a better picture on what will be the requirements and the efforts that are needed from the international customs community. In my view, the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement represents a great opportunity for customs administrations to pursue and deliver modernization programs. I'm sure it will represent a new impetus for capacity building support, and a lot of assistance, including funding, as mentioned by the World Bank, will be available for developing economies. It's up to us now to streamline this assistance, this support, in a way that takes into consideration the reality of each customs administration, each border agencies, and tailor to their real needs. In this regard, I want to mention that the WCO established in 2003, 10 years ago, a WCO capacity building strategy. That strategy was designed and built exactly because we were expecting a trade facilitation agreement at the WTO. That was the moment, 10 years ago. After 10 years, we have developed a lot in this area. And what I can say is the WCO capacity building strategy is still valid, it is still modern, and certainly can be applied for the support international organizations and international community expect to deliver to less developed and developing countries. So my conclusions for this afternoon is we are not starting from zero. The customs administration has done a lot so far, but there is still a lot to do. Approval of the agreement is just the first step. Implementation and capacity building requires a lot of energy, passion, and commitment. We need to put implementation of the agreement on trade facilitation in broader development plans attached to national reality. This is absolutely fundamental, owned by the administrations. They have owned the programs. We need to expand the focus from customs administration to broader border management. This is, I think, the major message from the agreement. And we should not reinvent the wheel. We should build on the success already achieved over the last 10 years. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ernani, for that very insightful overview. Trade facilitation is but one of the many objectives of customs, and we can't tackle trade facilitation in isolation. In fact, it's not just customs, but as Ernani correctly pointed out, many border management agencies are involved, but customs is well positioned to lead in the reform. And I must say that I'm very comfortable knowing that Ernani is chairing the Capacity Building Committee, because I think he'll do an excellent job in leading this and taking it forward.